I left work later than usual that day, running to catch my normal bus home. Unfortunately, I arrived at my regular stop just in time to see the bus pulling away in a cloud of exhaust. Frustrated and kicking myself for not leaving earlier, I decided to try another route. I remembered seeing a small bus stop sign a couple of blocks away, though I was sure it wasn't part of the standard service. Still, I didn't feel like waiting another 40 minutes at a crowded station, so I headed in that direction, hoping for a faster ride home. The evening sky dimmed with approaching dusk, and a chill wind stirred bits of trash and leaves around my feet. I turned down a narrow side street I hardly ever used. The buildings here looked older, and some were boarded up. Street lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the pavement. Eventually, I spotted a faded metal sign that read "Bus Stop" in chipped paint. Beneath it, an old bench sat crookedly on the sidewalk. Next to the bench was a battered digital screen, half covered by peeling stickers. I approached hesitantly, noticing that I couldn't find this stop on my phone's transit map. The app showed no scheduled service at this location. Confused, I tapped near the address, but the map simply highlighted another route far away. However, the bench and sign looked official enough, just old and neglected. Maybe the city had retired this stop long ago and never removed the sign. Still, a hint of hope lingered that a bus might come eventually. Taking a seat on the worn bench, I tried to ignore the chilly breeze. A faint glow came from the digital screen on a post nearby. Its glass was cracked, and the picture flickered unsteadily. Curious, I leaned forward to read whatever it displayed. It seemed to be cycling through old ads, each pixel flickering. A jingle played softly before cutting off in static. Then the screen showed an outdated promotion. Ride Route 88 for a faster trip, home limited time only. The date on the screen was from years ago. That was strange. I'd never heard of Route 88 in my city. I watched the screen loop through the same old commercials a few times, then fade out to black static, only to restart again. A weird, uneasy feeling crept over me, as though the bus stop were stuck in a time warp. The surroundings reinforced that feeling. The broken street lamp overhead, the distant echo of the city that felt miles away, and the emptiness of this forgotten area. Still, I shrugged and told myself I was just overthinking. Perhaps I lucked into discovering an out-of-use stop that might still have a rare bus passing by. Time passed, and the air grew colder. Dusk turned to full darkness, pressing in on the narrow street. No cars drove by, and I saw nobody walking around. The only light came from the glitchy screen and a half-functioning street lamp that buzzed overhead. Occasionally, a commercial for an ancient sale or event flickered across the screen before dissolving into static. "Route 88 will come shortly," one ad insisted, showing smiling commuters. The images flicked and warped, giving me an eerie shiver. I checked my phone. It was nearly 8 p.m. By now, I should have just taken the usual bus or even called a rideshare. Yet for some reason, I stayed put. A curious pull held me there, a sense that the bus stop had something to reveal. Maybe a part of me wanted to see if the bus would really come. I scanned the empty street, hugging my jacket closer against the wind. With each minute, I grew more certain no normal bus would ever appear here. Eventually, I heard a soft rumble echo from down the street. It was so distant that at first I couldn't tell if it was real or just my imagination. Then the battered screen lit up bright, displaying a Route 88 arriving banner in glitchy text. My heart flipped. I stood up, stepping toward the curb, but as I peered into the darkness, I saw only shadows. The rumble faded. No headlights, no approaching vehicle. Soon, the screen returned to its static. I let out a long breath, disappointment mixing with a strange relief. Something about that moment made the hair on my arms stand up. It felt like the bus stop was playing with me, teasing a service that no longer existed. I slowly returned to the bench, thoughts swirling in my head. What if this stop once served a route that ended abruptly, maybe canceled after an accident or a budget cut? The flickering ad might be a leftover ghost from a time when the bus still came. Had that final bus never arrived for the people waiting? Another 10 minutes crept by in silence. No further signs of a bus. At last, I admitted I was wasting my evening waiting for something that would never come. Gathering my courage, I stood and glanced at the screen one last time. It showed the same worn-out message. Route 88 arriving soon. Below it, the date read a year from the past. The image flickered out. I sighed, feeling both sad and unsettled. This place felt trapped in its own loop of hope and disappointment. I started walking away, noticing how quiet the night had become. My footsteps echoed off the abandoned buildings. A block later, the normal city glow and the occasional passing vehicle returned, making me feel more grounded. I found a regular bus stop, familiar and warm under bright streetlights with an updated schedule clearly posted. Within minutes, a real bus arrived, and I stepped aboard, grateful for its normalcy. Still, the forgotten bus stop lingered in my mind. Over the next few days, I searched online for any mention of Route 88 or that spot. I found nothing in the current transit listings. Searching older archives turned up a brief reference. Route 88 used to run years ago, until a tragic accident forced the city to discontinue it. The details were scarce, but rumor had it that the route was canceled mid-schedule, leaving riders stranded. Some insisted it was a curse, saying the final bus never reached its last stop. Though I can't say if the story is true, I remember the screen's flicker, the ghostly ad promising a ride that never came. Part of me wonders if late at night, when the city's quiet, that lost bus still tries to finish its route, searching for passengers at a stop everyone forgot. If I ever pass that abandoned corner again, I might look to see if the battered screen still glows, waiting for someone to believe in a promise that's long expired. But I doubt I'll wait for that bus again. Sometimes it's wiser to leave certain mysteries in the shadows, rather than stand in the cold, holding on to hope for a ride that will never arrive. I was taking a late-night walk through my neighborhood, hoping to clear my head after a stressful day. The main street was quiet, just a few street lamps and the occasional passing car. I decided to turn down a side road that led past the old cell tower, the one I usually avoided because it didn't have many houses or lights. Something about that tower always felt a bit eerie, looming tall with blinking red lights in the darkness. As I followed the curved path, I heard a low, droning noise. It was so soft at first, I thought it was just the distant sound of air conditioning units from nearby buildings. But as I got closer to the tower, the hum grew more distinct, almost vibrating in my chest. A chill ran down my arms. I had walked by this tower before and never heard such a noise. Curiosity overcame caution. Instead of heading home, I continued toward the tall metal structure. The gravel crunch of my footsteps on the unpaved road sounded loud in the otherwise silent night. Overhead, the moon was hidden behind clouds, making the tower's red safety lights stand out even more. Eventually, I reached the fenced enclosure around the tower. A sign warned, "Authorized personnel only." Usually, the gate was locked, but somebody had left it partially open. My heart rate picked up. I knew I shouldn't trespass, but the strange hum pulled me in. It was deeper there, resonating in my ears like a soft engine or a giant beehive. I glanced around, saw nobody watching. Against my better judgment, I slipped through the gap in the fence. Inside the enclosure, I noticed a small maintenance door at the base of the tower. I'd never paid much attention to it before. That night it stood ajar, which was highly unusual. I thought about turning back. This was private property, and I had no real reason to go in. But the hum was even louder near that door, and in the narrow seam between the door and the frame, a faint blue glow flickered. It was impossible to ignore. Summoning my courage, I stepped closer. The thick metal door had scratches on it, as if someone had pried it open. "Hello," I called out softly, though I doubted anyone would answer. The only reply was the steady drone that seemed to pulse. A subtle vibration traveled through the ground, tickling the soles of my shoes. I gently pushed the door open. It creaked, revealing a cramped room with concrete walls. Dim, pale blue lights shone from somewhere behind a large piece of machinery. At first I assumed they were part of the tower's normal equipment, but I had never seen lights like these in other utility rooms. These looked strangely alive, shimmering rather than glowing steadily. Cautiously, I stepped inside. The air felt cooler than outside, with a faint metallic smell. Rows of wires lined the walls, leading up toward the tower's interior. I walked around the machinery, which appeared to be some sort of power unit or transmitter. Most cell towers have standard electrical systems, blinking control panels and fans. But this was different. I saw cylinders of some unknown material and a cluster of cables that didn't match anything I recognized. Behind one of the large units, a soft glow pulsed. As I crept closer, the hum became more rhythmic, like a low-frequency heartbeat. My skin tingled at the odd sensation, and my stomach flipped in a mix of excitement and fear. The blue lights bounced reflections off the metal walls, forming patterns that almost looked like writing. Suddenly, the maintenance door squealed shut behind me, causing me to jump. My stomach lurched. Spinning around, I realized the door had swung closed of its own accord, or maybe it was pushed by the wind. I tried not to panic and took slow, careful steps back toward the entry. A quick tug confirmed it was still unlocked, so at least I wasn't trapped. But my nerves were on edge. For a moment I considered leaving, yet something in that corner called for my attention. So I turned back and, with shaky hands, used the torchlight on my phone to illuminate the area behind the machinery. There on the floor lay scattered tools, wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers. They looked old, as if left untouched for a long time, but no dust covered them. Nearby, a piece of wire was cut and wrapped in an odd pattern, almost like a small antenna. The hum deepened. The blue glow pulsed faster as though it sensed my presence. My heart pounded as I inched closer, shining my phone's light. A transparent tube emerged from the base of the machinery, filled with swirling, luminous liquid. Tiny bubbles rose and popped, giving it that shimmering effect. This was no ordinary equipment for a cell tower. My mind raced with questions. Was this some advanced experiment? Something the tower company hadn't disclosed? I reached out to touch the tube, but hesitated. The radiation risk sign on the wall suddenly felt more serious. I drew back my hand, deciding it was better not to make contact. A thump came from behind the unit, making me freeze. I held my breath, adrenaline surging. "Is someone there?" I whispered again. No voice answered, just the hum. Then I heard a soft, scraping sound, like metal sliding against the floor. My pulse raced, and I pointed my phone's light toward the source. In the shadows, I glimpsed a shape angular and reflective. Stepping forward, I carefully peered around the edge of the machinery. There, on the floor, lay something resembling a small metal box or device with wires trailing from it. That box shifted just a tiny bit, almost as if it was alive. My mind rebelled at the idea. Machines don't move by themselves. As I watched, the box glowed with the same faint blue color, and a single cable twitched like a tail. I gasped, stumbling backward, nearly dropping my phone. The device reacted, flickering rapidly, which caused the entire machinery to vibrate in response. The hum in the room grew intense, echoing in my chest. Fear overwhelmed me. This was beyond any normal explanation. I felt the walls closing in, the cold air pressing on my lungs. Gathering courage, I forced my legs to move, stepping slowly away from whatever that device was. The hum beat against my eardrums, and sweat prickled on my temples. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the box, half expecting it to lurch forward. Finally, I spun on my heel and dashed to the door. My shoes slid on the concrete, but I managed to yank the door wide and stumble out into the night air. The hum, now muffled by the walls, still vibrated in my skull. I pushed the door shut behind me, my breaths coming out in ragged gasps. Outside, everything seemed darker than before. The tower's red lights blinked overhead while the fence behind me rattled in the wind. I paused, heart racing, telling myself to calm down. Did I genuinely see a moving machine in there? Or was it just some odd illusion under the flickering blue lights? The sensation in my chest said it was real enough. After a few shaky breaths, I hurried out of the enclosure, making sure to push the gate closed behind me. I checked the road still empty. Overhead, the clouds shifted enough for a sliver of moonlight to peek through. Rushing down the gravel path, I wanted only to get away, to be back in the safety of well-lit streets. When I reached a familiar intersection, I slowed down, resting my hands on my knees to catch my breath. My nerves still buzzed like static under my skin. The normal nighttime noises, crickets, distant cars offered a strange comfort after the tower's intense hum. It took me a while to compose myself enough to walk home. I spent that night lying awake, the phantom sound of that low drone echoing in my mind. I thought about calling someone, maybe the local power company or the tower's operators, to report the open door and mysterious glow. But I couldn't find the right words. "Hey, I think there's a weird living device behind the cell tower equipment. It glows and moves. You might want to check it out." I worried they'd laugh or think I was crazy. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. The next day, I tried looking up any reports about the tower or local experiments. I found nothing unusual, just standard notices about cell service expansions. I even took a drive past the tower in broad daylight. The fence gate was locked again, and no hum was audible over the normal traffic. During the day, it looked just like any standard cell tower. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something is hidden there, something beyond normal technology. Late at night, if I focus, I recall the hum's vibrations as though they're in my bones. Sometimes I think about going back after dark, maybe bringing a camera or a friend, but part of me is scared of what I might find. Could that device be dangerous? Is it from some secret project? Could it be something not from our world? For now, I keep my distance. Each time I pass that corner of the neighborhood, I sense a faint tension in the air, as if the tower knows I discovered its secret. Maybe one night, when my courage outweighs my fear, I'll return to investigate further. Or maybe I'll let it remain a mystery, a memory of blue lights and a strange hum in the darkness. Sometimes it feels safer not to chase every unexplained phenomenon, especially when the silence of the night can hide so much. I used to work part-time at a small strip mall that was slowly losing its stores. Many shops had closed, leaving behind empty windows and dusty floors. My job was to help remove leftover items from these abandoned units and check for any maintenance issues. It was not the most exciting job, but it paid my bills. One afternoon, I was sent to clean up an old shoe store that had been empty for a year. The front door was unlocked, so I went in, flipping on the overhead lights. They flickered, then steadied, revealing rows of empty shelves. The air smelled stale, and footprints in the dust showed that someone occasionally walked through, probably to take old shelving or hardware. I wandered around, picking up stray boxes and tossing them into a large trash bag. After a while, I noticed something unusual. In one corner, a tall rack had been pushed aside, revealing a gray metal door in the wall. I had never seen a door there before, and it wasn't on the building's floor plan. It had no sign or label, just a small doorknob. Intrigued, I tried the knob, but it refused to budge.
Locked.
That made me curious. Why would the store's owners lock a door and then hide it behind a rack? I searched the counter area and the manager's office for a key, but found nothing. The entire place was nearly bare. A single file cabinet in the back held just a few receipts and old flyers. Despite a little voice in my head warning me to leave it alone, I kept thinking about that locked door. It felt like a secret waiting to be discovered. After a short break, I returned to the door and tested the knob again, more forcefully. No luck. I'm not proud to admit it, but I decided to break in. I reasoned that, since the store was already closed and everything was being cleared out, it couldn't hurt to see what was inside. I left the store briefly, returning with a small pry bar from my car trunk. My heart thumped as I wedged it into the gap near the latch. With a quick snap, the latch gave, and the door swung open. The smell of old, stale air rolled out. I coughed, waving away the dust. Using my phone's flashlight, I peeked past the doorway. The light revealed a small, hidden room, about the size of a large closet. I stepped in carefully, letting my eyes adjust. Dim overhead lighting flickered to life as soon as I found the switch near the entrance. A quiet hum indicated the power was still on. The room looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The walls were plain, painted a dull beige. In one corner stood a small table and chair, both covered in a thick layer of dust. The table held a faded notebook and an old lamp. On the opposite side, a narrow cot with a dingy blanket was pushed against the wall. This hidden space felt strange, part storeroom, part hideaway. I walked around slowly, my shoes stirring dust motes in the stale air. It was eerie. Why would anyone set up a small living space in a store's back corner? And if they did, why did they abandon it without clearing it out? The dust told me nobody had been here for a long time. Yet, despite the thick coatings of grime on everything, something else caught my eye. A single footprint on the floor, fresh and distinct in the dust. I froze, staring at that footprint. It looked recent, like someone had stepped there only a short time ago. But I hadn't seen another soul in the building unless they hid in here while I was outside, or they snuck out after I arrived. An uneasy feeling crept over me, and my pulse quickened. My gaze moved around the room, searching for any sign of the person who left that footprint. Everything except the floor seemed blanketed in dust, with no prints on furniture or walls. The cot's blanket looked undisturbed. Even the table's thin layer of powder looked unmarked, no finger trails. It was as if someone walked in carefully, stood in that spot, and then disappeared. I knelt to examine the footprint more closely. The edges were crisp, not yet softened by settling dust. I placed my shoe next to it. It was smaller than mine, probably a man's size in between or a bigger woman's size. My mind spun with possibilities. Could it be a vagrant? Someone who found a hiding spot in the store? But the locked door contradicted that idea. Then again, maybe they had their own way in or out. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the quiet walls. No answer came. A wave of tension spread through my body. I glanced at the corners, half expecting a figure to emerge from the shadows. Determined to gather clues, I walked to the small table. The notebook on top was worn and discolored. Using the corner of my shirt to wipe off the dust, I gently opened the cover. The first page held some scribbles and dates I didn't recognize. As I flipped through, I saw sketches of shoe designs, strange notes, and arrows pointing to phone numbers. Some pages mentioned quiet retreat or check the door. The handwriting was erratic. This wasn't a normal store ledger or employee manual. I looked at the lamp on the table, an old-fashioned desk lamp without a bulb. Beneath it lay a small photo, face down. I picked it up carefully, inhaling dust. The picture showed a man in his late 30s wearing a plain shirt and a tired smile. Next to him stood a woman, her expression serious. The background looked like some manufacturing workshop. No labels, no dates. The edges of the photo had curled from age. Suddenly, a soft creak made me jump. My heart pounded as I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight on the door. It remained open, revealing an empty store beyond. The light from the store's ceiling gave enough illumination to see that nobody was there. Had the floor settled, or had someone stepped near the door? I realized how vulnerable I felt in that cramped space. The single fresh footprint seemed to suggest a visitor, someone who might return at any moment. The thought made a shiver run through me. I quickly set the photo aside and rushed to check behind the cot. Nothing was there but a few crumpled tissues in a plastic bag. A shallow closet at the back contained a broom, a few boxes, and no sign of anyone hiding. I considered calling the building owner or maybe the police, but what would I say? I'd broken the lock, found a weird room with old furniture and one fresh footprint. Probably they'd tell me to clear out and lock up properly. Yet part of me wanted to solve this little mystery, not just abandon it. I decided to take a closer look at the boxes in that tiny closet. One of the boxes contained old catalogs from the store's shoe inventory. Another held personal items, a mug, a few notebooks, and a small portable radio. Everything was dusty, as if left behind in a hurry. I had a feeling the previous occupant might have used this room as a private space for some unknown reason, but who left that new footprint? Eventually, I realized I should lock up and leave before I got into trouble. I put the notebook and photo back where I found them, trying to keep everything as I had discovered it. My eyes kept returning to the single footprint. It felt like a puzzle piece missing its larger picture. Was it left by the same person who wrote in the notebook? Or did someone else stumble in here like I did? Stepping out into the store, I looked around once more. Nothing seemed out of place, just the dusty shelves and scattered boxes. I pulled the hidden room's door shut, but it no longer latched properly after my forced entry. Tying a piece of rope around the doorknob and a pipe nearby, I did my best to keep it closed. An odd sense of guilt tugged at me for disturbing that forgotten space. As I gathered my cleaning supplies, I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling. The fresh footprint felt like a sign that somebody was still around, quietly visiting or living in that cramped corner. Yet why so little evidence? Why no trace of movement or other footprints? The silence in the store weighed on me as I loaded up the last of the trash bags and turned off the main lights. I left the store, locking the front entrance behind me with the manager's key. Rain had started falling outside, tapping gently on the sidewalk and soaking the empty parking lot. Under the glow of the street lamp, I paused and glanced back at the dark interior. I imagined someone emerging from the hidden room, checking if I was gone, footsteps echoing in the empty space. The idea made my skin prickle. Over the next few days, I couldn't get that hidden room out of my mind. I told a friend about it, though not the part about breaking in, and they joked about ghosts or secret squatters. But something about the footprint, the dust, the old furniture, and that abandoned notebook suggested a more personal story, one lost in time. Perhaps the occupant had reasons to remain hidden, or maybe they simply locked the door and left, not realizing it would remain a secret all these years. I returned to the strip mall a week later. Someone had sealed the shoe store's entrance with plywood, preparing for renovations. I peered through a gap and saw a couple of workers inside removing shelves. I wondered if they had discovered the hidden door yet, or if it remained concealed behind the tall rack. Maybe they'd soon find that peculiar space along with the single fresh footprint. Even now, I sometimes think about that small, dusty room. In my mind, I still see the pale shape of that footprint, so crisp against the dusty floor. Who left it and why? Did they unlock the door from the inside moments before I arrived? Were they watching me from somewhere? There are no clear answers. The hidden room remains an unsolved mystery, one that lingers in my thoughts like a question waiting for closure. And though I may never know the truth, I'll never forget the unsettling feeling of standing alone in that lost corner, seeing evidence that I wasn't the only one who came looking for secrets. I ended up in the warehouse district one night by accident, trying to find a shortcut home. My phone's battery had died and I couldn't pull up a proper map. The streets here were dark and quiet, lined with large, empty buildings. Old street lamps flickered, casting wavering shadows on the cracked pavement. The silence felt thick, like the entire district was asleep or forgotten. After wandering around for a while, I decided to look for something familiar. Maybe a sign that pointed me toward the main road. Instead, I spotted a faint flicker of light coming from an old warehouse. It had tall, rusty doors and most windows were boarded up. Yet, through a broken window near the top, I caught a glimpse of a soft glow. It blinked on and off, unsteady, as though from a weak flashlight or some faulty bulb. Curiosity tugged at me. What could be happening inside an abandoned warehouse at this hour? Maybe teens hanging out, or squatters who had set up a makeshift home? Part of me said to keep moving, find a path back to civilization. But the other part wanted to take a quick look, convinced that maybe I'd find someone willing to show me the way out of the district. With my nerves on edge and my heart beating faster, I approached the side entrance. The metal door looked rusted shut, but when I gave it a push, it groaned open. I stepped inside, dust swirling in the stale air. The scene was dim, only faintly lit by the flickering light I had seen from outside. My eyes struggled to adjust, but eventually I made out rows of metal racks and crates. Some crates were broken, their contents scattered on the floor. Random bits of plastic, old wires, scraps of paper. Everything was coated in a layer of dust like nobody had stepped inside for years. But as I shone the small beam of my phone's remaining flashlight around, I realized that wasn't entirely true. A series of footprints trailed across the dusty floor. My pulse quickened. Someone had been here, and recently enough to leave clear prints. I followed them carefully, each step stirring more dust. Strangely, the footprints were perfect up to a point, and then seemed to fade into nothing, as though the person had vanished. I waved my phone light around the spot where they ended, searching for any continuation. The dust looked undisturbed beyond that point. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice echoing among the tall walls and high ceiling. No reply came, just the muffled drip of water from some broken pipe. The flickering light I had seen outside still shone somewhere deeper inside the warehouse, so I pressed on. Moving past old machinery, I passed shadows dancing on the walls. The deeper I went, the more I felt a sense of being watched. It was like someone stood behind one of the tall racks, observing my every move. Occasionally, I thought I caught movement in the corner of my eye. But whenever I turned my head, I only saw a shifting shadow or a dangling chain. Eventually, I reached a set of stairs leading up to a small office room on the second level. Gut instinct told me the flickering light was up there. The metal staircase rattled under my weight, each step echoing ominously. When I reached the top, I found a grimy window that overlooked the main floor. It felt strange seeing the warehouse from above like a huge, quiet maze. The office door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, a pale glow illuminated the dusty floor. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Inside, I discovered a single desk, an old chair, and a flickering battery-powered lantern on top of a filing cabinet. The lantern's bulb blinked unsteadily, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse. I scanned the room, expecting to see someone or something that explained the footprints. But the place was empty. Papers were strewn across the floor, all covered in scribbles I couldn't read clearly. Some pages had drawings of shapes I didn't recognize. My gaze went to the floor near the desk. More footprints were there, leading up to the cabinet and then stopping in the middle of the room. Again, no sign of anyone walking away. Anxiety seeped through me. It felt as though whoever made these tracks had simply disappeared. The idea made me shiver. Without warning, the lantern blinked off, plunging the room into near darkness. A chill gust from outside ruffled some pages on the floor. My heart hammered as I fumbled for my phone flashlight, which provided only a weak beam now, almost out of battery. In that dim glow, I glimpsed a reflection in the office window. My own figure, plus what looked like a faint shape behind me. I spun around, shining my phone's light, but saw only the empty room. That was enough for me. My nerves frayed, I shoved the door open and hurried back down the stairs. Each step rattled, amplifying my urgency. On the warehouse floor, the shadows somehow felt denser. I followed my earlier path, scanning for the footprints I'd seen before. I found them, and they still led nowhere. It was as if they'd been mocking me, showing me how someone else had come in and vanished. Reaching the metal door, I forced it open and burst into the night air. A wave of relief washed over me, even though I was still stuck in the desolate warehouse district. The distant sound of a car engine suggested I was closer to a main street than I thought. I trudged down the road, heart calming with each step. I didn't look back. Later, after charging my phone, I checked a map and realized how far off my usual path I had wandered. The warehouse was owned by some old manufacturing company but had been shut down years ago. No official mention of squatters or rumors. That didn't surprise me. Whatever I found in there felt more elusive than mere squatters. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the flickering light, or if it was real but left behind by someone who had fled. Yet nothing explains those footprints ending abruptly, or the shape I glimpsed in the window's reflection. Even now I feel uneasy recalling it. The warehouse district remains a place I avoid, but I can't help thinking about those footprints and the dust leading into empty space, as though the person had stepped into another world right in front of me. It's a memory that keeps me wary whenever I find myself in old, abandoned places, knowing that some secrets might never be fully explained. I decided to take a walk late one night to clear my thoughts. Most people find cemeteries scary after dark, but I always thought of them as peaceful places. The headstones stood silent under the moonlight, and the calm air felt cooler than in the daytime. I could hear only the rustle of nearby leaves in the light wind. The pathways were narrow, and sparse lamps cast weak circles of light on the gravel. Every now and then, a small gust would make the trees sigh, creating a low sound that echoed between the marble statues and tombstones. As I strolled along, I thought about how many people avoided cemeteries, especially at night. I never saw anything strange there before. Yes, sometimes I shivered thinking about the stories people told or the scary movies I had watched, but I reminded myself that these were simply final resting places, quiet and still. The only moments that startled me were when a stray animal like a cat or raccoon darted from behind a headstone. That night, the moon was high and bright, giving the graves a pale glow. I passed by rows of tombstones, reading names and dates out of habit. Some were ancient, worn from weather, barely readable. Others looked newly carved, with fresh flowers placed in front. Small pebbles on the path crunched under my feet. Occasionally I stepped on a fallen twig, making it snap. Apart from these soft sounds, the cemetery felt oddly serene. I made my way to a section I rarely visited, an older part with taller trees and fewer lamps. The shadows there were thicker, falling across the tombstones like dark blankets. As I turned a corner around a tall mausoleum, I heard a sound that made me stop. It wasn't the breeze or an animal. It was laughter, distant, muffled laughter. It reverberated gently, as if someone was chuckling behind a row of headstones. My pulse quickened. I glanced around for any sign of movement or a person. The laughter faded and the air fell silent again. Deciding it must be my imagination, I walked further, trying to stay calm. But anxiety tugged at my mind, urging me to be alert. No one else should be here this late, except maybe a caretaker making late rounds. Yet I saw no flashlight beams or anything like that. A few steps later I heard it again, this time clearer. It was a soft, playful laugh, as if someone was enjoying a private joke in the darkness. I paused and stood still, holding my breath. My ears strained to catch any other sound. The laughter tapered off once more. I tried to see where it came from, but the moonlight offered limited visibility beyond the crooked tombstones. I took a cautious step off the main path, following the direction I thought the laughter came from. My shoes sank slightly into the soft grass, where old graves sprawled in uneven rows. The names on some stones were eroded and covered in moss, making them unreadable. A few steps deeper, I noticed an area of the ground that seemed recently dug. The dirt looked fresh, darker than the surrounding soil. My mind jumped to the possibility of a new burial. That was normal in a cemetery, though it still gave me a chill to stumble across it at night. Suddenly, the laughter rose again, this time very close. My heart pounded. I spun around quickly, shining the weak beam of my phone's screen in the direction of the sound. Nothing, just more tombstones in the dancing shadow of a large oak tree. Abandoning the phone light for a moment, I looked carefully at the ground around me, scanning for footprints or any sign that might show someone had just been there. My gaze fell on the patch of fresh dirt. Something stood out, a distinct handprint pressed into the soil. The edges were neat, as if someone had placed a hand there moments ago. A wave of alarm shot through me, because when I first saw that patch of dirt, I was pretty sure there was no handprint. I could have missed it, but I felt sure it hadn't been there. The night grew still again, and the laughter vanished. But now my stomach twisted in unease. Who had placed their hand in the dirt, and how did they do it so quietly? Perhaps it was a prank, a group of people messing around in the cemetery, having fun at the expense of anyone who wandered by. But I saw no group, no flickering flashlights from teasing teenagers. I bent down slowly, hoping to see more clues in the dirt. The handprint was small, not child-size, but definitely more delicate than my own. I brushed a bit of loose soil aside, revealing that the print went fairly deep. Whoever made it must have pressed with force. My breath caught in my chest. The dirt was still moist, which made the handprint crisp. If someone stood there just before me, where had they gone? A chill settled on my skin. The air felt heavier, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. I rose to my feet, thinking maybe I should leave. But a surge of curiosity made me linger. I stepped around the area, shining my phone's weak light at the surrounding stones. Some had old inscriptions about peaceful rest and loving memories. None gave me a hint about fresh laughter or footprints. As I turned to head back to the main path, a gentle whisper brushed past my ear. It sounded like a breeze carrying a stray word, but I knew the wind didn't speak. My heart thudded loudly as I swung around. Shadows cast by the moon shifted across the ground. The big oak tree swayed, producing a quiet rustle. Beyond that, nothing. I tried to calm myself, telling my racing mind that everything was normal. Yet, the tension wouldn't lift. My footsteps grew quicker as I cut between gravestones, returning to the lit pathway. The dull glow of the old-fashioned lamps looked welcoming now, even though moments ago I found it cold. Once on the main path, I breathed easier, though I kept glancing over my shoulder. I made my way toward the cemetery gate, determined to end my walk. As I neared the exit, the laughter came one last time, faint but unmistakable. It drifted from behind me, echoing among the graves. The sound was neither happy nor aggressive. It was just chilling. I forced myself not to turn around, afraid of what I might or might not see. Walking faster, I reached the ornate metal gate and slipped through. Only when I stood outside on the sidewalk beneath the bright streetlight did I notice how tense my shoulders were. My breathing was shallow. Normally, I would take a final look back at the peaceful headstones, grateful for the quiet moment of reflection. But not that night. I simply hurried down the road, wanting to put distance between me and that fresh handprint in the earth. A block later, I finally slowed down, feeling the normal city vibe around me, faint traffic in the distance, light from apartment windows, the hum of a late-night bus. The cemetery felt far away, and with each step the sense of unease receded. I told myself it was probably local kids playing pranks, or my imagination pairing a stray giggle with some random mark in the ground. But deep inside, I couldn't fully accept that explanation. Over the next few days, the experience stuck in my mind. I considered telling a friend, but how to explain hearing laughter and finding a sudden handprint was tricky. Most likely they'd tease me or assume I made it up. Eventually, I decided to return during daylight to check the spot, reassure myself it was just ordinary. When the weekend came, I visited the cemetery again in the late afternoon. The sun cast long shadows, but everything had a warm, ordinary feel. I walked the same route, past the tall mausoleum, into the older section. Families with flowers quietly roamed the newer graves, and a gardener was trimming some overgrown bushes. Once at the older area, I found the new grave. Now it had a small marker, a simple named plaque. Fresh flowers lay on the mound of earth, arranged neatly. I knelt to look for the handprint, but the soil was no longer soft. It had settled. If there had been a print, it was erased by time or by the caretaker's maintenance. I touched the ground gently, remembering how I saw that deep imprint in the dirt. Nothing looked out of place. No sign of laughter, only the quiet rustling of leaves. Sighing, I stood up and looked around. In the daylight, the place seemed calm and unthreatening. It was hard to believe it was the scene of my unsettling experience just a few nights before. Still, I couldn't forget the eerie giggle in the darkness, or how that print hadn't been there and then suddenly appeared. I found myself scanning each grave for any clue footprints, disturbed grass, anything. But it was just an ordinary cemetery scene. Birds perched on headstones, and the sunlight made the marble shimmer. It almost felt like the environment was telling me, "You won't find proof here." I left, more relaxed in the daylight, though a lingering question stayed with me. If someone had truly been there leaving that print, why? Did they want to unnerve anyone passing by? Or was something else at work? Something not entirely of the everyday world we know? In time, I decided to accept it as one of life's small mysteries. Maybe it was a prank or a strange coincidence, or maybe something beyond normal explanation. Though the cemetery is still a place I visit, I now choose earlier hours. And on nights when I pass by the gate, I don't linger. I feel a subtle pull to look inside, half expecting to hear that laughter again. When people ask why cemeteries sometimes feel eerie, I could share my story, but I rarely do. Instead, I simply say that cemeteries are quiet and can spark the imagination. Deep down, I know I heard what I heard, and I saw what I saw, a fresh handprint on newly turned earth, appearing out of nowhere, paired with soft laughter drifting in the moonlight. It was enough to make one calm stroll in a cemetery feel like a visit to the edge of something unknown. And that memory remains with me, a quiet reminder that sometimes the line between the ordinary and the mysterious can become very thin indeed. I sometimes volunteer for overnight cleanup jobs at different places in town. It's a way to earn a few extra dollars, and I typically enjoy the quiet that settles in after everyone leaves. One evening, I got assigned to an old sports arena that hadn't hosted a major event in years. The city kept it partially open for small gatherings and the occasional community function, but it mostly stayed empty. When I arrived, the manager handed me a set of keys and gave me a brief tour. Under the fluorescent lights of the hallway, everything seemed ordinary, just long corridors, offices with old posters on the walls, and concession stands shut tight. The manager mentioned that most parts of the stadium no longer had working power. Only certain areas were lit, like the hallways and the big overhead lights on the field. The scoreboard was usually left off to save electricity. My job was to sweep the stands, pick up trash, and make sure nothing was broken. I remember stepping into the main arena area for the first time that night. The place felt so large and empty, thousands of seats fanning out around a wide field. The overhead lights cast a dull grayish glow, leaving the corners in shadow. I shrugged off the slight chill. It was just a big, drafty stadium after all. I grabbed a trash bag, put on some headphones, and got to work. I figured music would make the quiet feel less eerie. Row by row, I swept up bits of popcorn, cups, and wrappers left behind by some recent small event. It took me a while, and by the time I reached the higher rows, my feet were tired and my back ached from bending to pick up junk. Around midnight, I paused to rest and took off my headphones. That's when I heard it. The sound of distant cheers, like a large crowd roaring in excitement. At first, I thought it must be coming from my headphones, maybe the tail end of a song, but the headphones were silent in my hand. The sound seemed to echo from somewhere in the stadium below, reverberating off concrete walls. My pulse sped up. I leaned over the railing, peering down at the field far below. It was dimly lit, but completely empty. Rows of seats lay silent, with no signs of anyone else. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that thousands of voices had just been cheering. And then, as quickly as it started, the roar faded into stillness. My mind offered explanations. Maybe it was the wind or the old speakers glitching. The manager had said much of the system was outdated. I told myself not to be jumpy. Popping my headphones back on, I continued cleaning. Shortly after, I made my way to the next section. I expected it to be another hour of quiet work. This time, though, I kept my music volume lower, just in case. Sure enough, barely 15 minutes later, I picked up faint sounds again, whistles blowing, the murmur of an excited crowd like a big game was in progress. Pulling off my headphones, I realized it was real enough to make my heart pound. But when I glanced around, I saw nothing but empty seats lit by a few dull lights. Determined to laugh it off, I tried to push the odd noises from my mind. I thought, maybe the stadium is making weird echoes from outside traffic. But it was past midnight, and outside traffic would have been minimal. Plus, the sounds were too lively, too detailed like an actual sporting event in action. As I collected more trash bags to toss into the dumpster, the metal door near me squeaked open. A flickering light from the hallway outside spilled in. I tensed, thinking someone else was here, but I found only the empty corridor. Possibly a draft caused the door to move. Still, my nerves were on edge. My nerves. Eventually, I decided to head down to the field level, where some lights were still on. I wanted to see if maybe a radio had been left on. I half hoped to find a small device hidden somewhere, broadcasting recordings of old games. That would certainly be less creepy than an invisible crowd. Walking across the wide concrete concourse, I felt tiny in that huge place. My footsteps echoed in the empty halls, and I spotted old posters on the walls, showing players from past seasons. The frames were dusty, the images slightly faded. It felt as if the arena itself was stuck in time, remembering better, busier days. After a few turns, I arrived at a tunnel leading directly onto the field. The overhead lights spilled onto the green turf. The large scoreboard at the far end of the stadium loomed in darkness. I stepped onto the field, the artificial grass rustling under my shoes. Standing there, the sense of emptiness grew stronger. Suddenly, a burst of static crackled through speakers that must still be wired to the scoreboard or old sound system. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Then, without warning, a faint cheer rose again, echoing around me. My heart hammered. This time, the sound seemed to come from all sides, as though the stadium was filled with invisible fans. I spun around, scanning row after row of empty seats, searching for any sign of life. Somebody playing a prank or messing with the audio. I saw no one, just quiet shadows. The cheering swelled for a moment, then faded as if carried away by the wind. I reminded myself to stay rational. Perhaps an old recording had looped or some old mechanism had kicked on briefly. Then I heard a soft hum, and my eyes snapped to the scoreboard. The screen, which had been dark just seconds ago, now showed dim lights flickering to life. Fuzzy numbers lit up as though trying to display a score. The bright digits kept blinking, shifting, and then settling on some random score. Home 12, visitors 10. Underneath, the clock on the board read a time left, 01:45. It flickered, iced over with old LED segments. My stomach churned with unease. No official game was scheduled. This was just me, alone in the stadium, in the dead of night. The scoreboard crackled again, as if a long-broken speaker was attempting to broadcast an announcer's voice. But only static emerged. Then, in a burst, the scoreboard went fully bright, announcing a quarter or period that didn't match any actual sport. A wave of unnatural excitement shot through me, as if I had stumbled upon a scene from years ago still trying to replay itself. Suddenly, a shrill whistle echoed overhead, followed by thunderous applause. I stood there, rooted in place. My heart raced, sweat forming on my temples. The sound was detailed like thousands of hands clapping and cheering, a crowd believing they were watching a close match. Then it died away as abruptly as it began, leaving the stadium eerily silent. The scoreboard's lights flickered more, and then snapped off entirely, plunging the far end of the field into darkness again. I forced myself to move, breathing in ragged gasps. My only goal was to get out of there. Struggling to maintain composure, I hurried back the way I came, following the corridors until I reached the main doors. On the way, I switched off the overhead lights in the stands. My cleanup shift was definitely over. Normally, I'd never leave a job unfinished, but I couldn't stay inside that building another minute. Once outside, I double-checked the locks and practically ran to my car. The cold night air and the sound of traffic on a distant highway grounded me a bit. Safe behind my steering wheel, I sat for a moment, trying to calm down. Could it have been an electrical glitch? Could recordings from past games somehow replay through old speakers? Still shaken, I started the car and drove home, replaying every strange moment in my mind. Over the next few days, I considered telling the manager, but I worried they'd just laugh or think I was inventing stories to skip work. I ended up making a vague mention about hearing weird sounds, and the manager shrugged, saying the wiring in the stadium was ancient. "It does all kinds of strange things sometimes," he replied. That answer didn't fully convince me because the cheers I heard felt so real, like thousands of invisible fans reliving an old, forgotten game. And that scoreboard lighting up with an impossible match? It still sends a chill down my spine whenever I think about it. I have no logical explanation, only a suspicion that the arena holds memories of the excitement that once filled its stands, memories that occasionally come alive in the quiet hours of the night. I turned down another cleanup shift at that stadium, preferring to do my volunteer duties at community centers or parks instead. Whenever I pass the old arena from a distance, I feel a knot form in my stomach. I remember the roar of unseen voices, the scoreboard flickering with final scores for a game that never took place. Part of me wonders if, late at night, the ghosts of past crowds gather there in spirit, cheering on a match that ended long ago. And maybe, just maybe, the stadium keeps replaying its glory days, lighting up the scoreboard for anyone who happens to wander in and truly listen. Hey! Welco, I've always been fascinated by abandoned buildings, especially old theaters. There's something about the tall curtains, the seats covered in dust, and the silent stage that feels both sad and full of possibility. When I heard rumors about an old theater in my town, a place everyone said was haunted, I couldn't resist exploring. I arrived just after 11 at night. The outside of the building was in rough shape with broken windows and faded paint. An old marquee sign hung over the entrance, the letters long removed. In the moonlight, I could see leftover pieces of poster glued to the wall, advertising a show that never happened. The final performance was canceled decades ago, so people said, and the theater closed its doors for good. The main doors were locked, but I found a side entrance where a broken window allowed me to reach in and unlock the latch. My heart beat faster as I pushed the heavy door open. Dust swirled in the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. Inside, the lobby smelled musty, like old fabric and time-worn wood. Torn posters clung to the walls, their images almost unrecognizable. One corner still showed a smiling dancer in a sparkling costume, promising a wonderful finale that never took place. I walked carefully through the lobby, past an empty concession stand covered in cobwebs. The faded tiles on the floor creaked under my steps. The darkness felt thick, almost like a presence surrounding me. Yet something urged me on, a mix of curiosity and excitement. I had to see the stage, the heart of any theater. Opening the door to the main auditorium, I felt a rush of cool, stale air. Row after row of seats spread out before me, their red upholstery tattered, some seats missing altogether. My small flashlight revealed a high, ornate ceiling with peeling paint. Torn velvet curtains hung from the stage, ragged and dusty. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly still, frozen in time. I made my way down the aisle, being careful not to trip on fallen debris. The stage looked eerie under the faint light from my phone. A few old set pieces stood to one side, a broken stool, part of a painted backdrop, and what looked like a collapsed cardboard column. I tried to imagine the final rehearsal, dancers frantically practicing, the orchestra tuning instruments. Then, just before opening night, everything got canceled, leaving the stage abandoned forever. I climbed the wooden steps to the stage. My footsteps echoed in the huge, empty space. Dust coated every surface, and my shoes left clear tracks. I stood at the center and swept my flashlight around, trying to picture an audience filling the seats and applauding. A strange hush fell over me, as if the walls remembered the excitement of shows long ago. Then out of nowhere, a sudden sound made my blood run cold. It was a faint click, like a switch being flipped. I nearly dropped my phone in surprise. The overhead spotlight, a single large lamp high above, lit up in a beam of pale light. In an instant, the center of the stage glowed brightly, as if someone was controlling the theater lights from the projection booth. My heart pounded. I looked toward the back of the auditorium to see if anyone was there, but it stayed dark. The spotlight shone down on an empty stage, except for me. My mind whirled with questions. Was this an electrical glitch? Did I accidentally trigger something? Or is someone here playing a prank? Before I could move, I heard soft applause. It wasn't loud or confident, but it was unmistakable. Gentle clapping, like a small audience watching a performance. Yet the seats were empty, every single one covered in dust. A chill crept up my spine. I lifted my flashlight, shining it on the rows of seats. No living soul was there. The clapping faded, leaving a thin echo that vanished into silence. A sense of awe and fear washed over me. The stage was bathed in that lonely spotlight, shining with bright clarity on dusty floorboards that hadn't felt a performer's step in decades. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run out the door immediately, but another part was drawn to it, feeling the energy of an unfinished story. Still shaking, I stepped out of the spotlight circle. I could see dust motes floating in the beam, glowing like tiny stars. My phone flashlight felt weak compared to that strong stage light. Slowly, I walked across the stage to the side, where I spotted an old control box. It had levers and switches labeled for lights, curtains, and backdrops. All of them were in the off position, which made no sense if the spotlight was shining so brightly. I tried flipping a few switches, but nothing changed. Meanwhile, the spotlight stayed on, unwavering. That's when I realized something. It was exactly midnight. I checked my phone screen and saw the time, 12:10 a.m. Suddenly a wave of dread hit me. People had gossiped about how, at midnight, a single light would turn on and a faint applause could be heard, as if the theater was replaying its final performance. I never truly believed those rumors until now. I took a shaky breath, reminding myself I wasn't in immediate danger. It felt more like I was witnessing a memory, an echo of a show that never happened. The quiet applause, the solitary spotlight. They might be the building's way of holding on to the dream of a final curtain call that never took place. Or perhaps they were the ghostly remains of an audience who had looked forward to a show they never got to see. Carefully, I walked back to center stage, letting the light fall over me once more. The applause didn't return, but the stillness felt charged. I could almost imagine the footsteps of dancers or the hush right before a musical piece begins. My heart thumped painfully in my chest as I considered standing there, addressing the invisible crowd, but fear overruled the idea. Instead, I backed away from the spotlight, leaving it shining alone on the empty stage. With trembling hands, I found my way down the steps and across the auditorium. My footsteps sounded too loud in the silence. Near the exit, I paused and looked over my shoulder. The lonely cone of light still illuminated the wooden boards, and in that moment, I thought I could see a shape, a faint outline of someone standing there. But it might have just been my imagination. I pushed open the auditorium door and hurried through the lobby. The old posters fluttered as I passed, as if giving me a silent farewell. Outside, the night air felt cold but refreshing. I inhaled deeply, grateful to be back in the real world. The old theater stood behind me, dark except for that mysterious single beam shining through a crack in the wall. In the days that followed, I debated what I had experienced. A power surge? A leftover setting in the control system? But no matter how many logical excuses I thought up, I couldn't deny what I heard. The clear, gentle applause echoing in an empty hall. The spotlight switching on at exactly midnight. I even considered going back with a friend, but part of me didn't want to disturb the place again. It felt like intruding on a memory that wasn't mine. Sometimes late at night, I remember how it felt to stand on that stage. The spotlight heat on my skin. The quiet clapping washing over me. I understand now why people say old theaters have spirits. They hold on to every performance, every canceled show, even every dream. For me, that single midnight spotlight is proof. Its ghostly glow honors the final show that never happened, shining for an audience of dust and echoes, with only the faintest applause remaining. Me to Natural Reader's AI voice generator, our only application built to assist creators and companies alike with commercial license voiceover audio. I was hired to film a documentary about abandoned spaces beneath the city. The old metro line, known to locals as the Forgotten Tunnel, was at the top of my list. People told me stories of strange noises and eerie graffiti that warned trespassers to keep away. But rumors and warnings only added to my curiosity. So one night, armed with a video camera, a flashlight, and a backpack of supplies, I decided to go down alone. Reaching the entrance wasn't hard. I followed a cracked pedestrian walkway near a boarded-up station. The main doors were sealed, but a side gate stood partially open, rusted at the hinges. A faded sign hanging from it read, "Closed for maintenance" in peeling letters, though it was obvious nobody had been here in years. My heart pounded with excitement as I stepped through, carefully closing the gate behind me so no one would notice I was inside. The air smelled of damp concrete and decay. Once past the gate, I found myself on a small landing where escalators had been, long out of service. Dusty steps led downward, so I clicked on my flashlight and began the descent. The overhead lights, if any remained, were broken or had no power. I heard faint dripping sounds echo in the darkness, and my footsteps stirred tiny whirlwinds of dust. I raised my camera and started recording, narrating quietly how the air grew cooler and how the station's graffiti lined the walls, scrawled in bright colors that had faded over time. The deeper I went, the stronger the musty smell became. Broken signs littered the floors, along with scraps of metal and scattered shards of glass. Water dripped from corroded pipes in the ceiling, forming small puddles on the tiles. Despite my nervousness, I felt a surge of determination. Capturing this place on video was my goal. People needed to see how easily large structures could be forgotten and left to rot. As I ventured forward, I spotted a giant piece of graffiti near an old ticket booth. The letters were red, bold, and jagged, spelling out, "Keep out." Underneath, in smaller writing, someone had added, "This means you." A shiver ran through me. I'd seen warnings before, but something about this felt personal, like a direct challenge to whoever dared to come here. I aimed my camera at it, zooming in so the words filled the frame. My voice shook a bit as I explained the message. It was one of many signs that the local urban explorers took seriously. I reached the main platform where trains once arrived. The tracks themselves lay below the platform edge, the rails rusty and silent. I knelt to film them, shining my flashlight across the metal. The beam picked up small rats scurrying away, squeaking in alarm. Their sudden movement startled me, reminding me I was all alone in this huge underground space. The platform stretched for what seemed like forever, interrupted only by massive pillars. Every so often, I spotted graffiti, including the same red, jagged letters. "Keep out. You are not welcome." Still, other tags were more artistic, colorful murals of cityscapes or cartoonish faces. Each piece gave me a glimpse into the souls of past explorers or artists who had sneaked down here to leave their mark. After filming the platform, I followed the route that led to the actual tunnel. A limp chain gate hung across the entrance, easy enough to step over. On the floor was a small puddle, reflecting my flashlight's beam. When I leaned down for a closer look, I noticed footprints, fresh prints that looked human. My breath caught in my throat. It was possible other explorers were inside, or maybe a homeless person. Suddenly I felt a chill, considering the possibility I wasn't alone. I kept silent, lifting my camera to record the footprints. They led into complete darkness down the tunnel. I hesitated but pressed on. The documentary needed interesting footage, and fresh footprints definitely counted as an interesting find. Walking on the edge of the tracks, I saw old cables dangling from the ceiling, some broken and sparking faintly. The occasional drip of water echoed like distant knocks. The air grew heavier, and the smell of wet concrete intensified. Each step felt more nerve-wracking than the last. Still, I tried to keep my commentary going, whispering into the camera's microphone about every sight and sound. But the deeper I traveled, the more I noticed odd messages on the walls. Some were just typical graffiti, but others carried a different tone. Urgent, almost desperate. "Don't go further," read one. Another said, "It's down there." A few steps ahead, in the same red paint, was a single word. "Stay." Something about that word bothered me. Usually warnings tell you to leave, but "stay" suggested something down here wanted me not just to come, but to remain. Trying to stay calm, I kept filming. Occasionally I called out, "Hello?" in hopes anyone present might answer. No one replied, and each echo of my voice sank into the darkness. My thoughts raced. If somebody wished ill on intruders, they might hide and wait. Was I heading into a trap? The tunnel curved gently. At a bend, I discovered a faint light ahead. My heart leapt. It could be old emergency lights flickering or someone's flashlight. I turned off my own light to see better in the darkness. Sure enough, a dim glow flickered around the corner, pale and unsteady like a candle flame. Slowly I crept forward, mindful of each footfall to avoid making noise. Rounding the bend, I found a small disused maintenance room carved into the tunnel wall. The door stood open, revealing a single candle on a crate, the flame dancing in an unseen draft. The flickering light cast ghastly shadows on the walls. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped closer. The candle was fresh, meaning someone had recently lit it. But who? I peered inside. The room was empty, save for the crate with the candle and a few crumpled papers scattered on the floor. I stepped in, camera rolling. One sheet of paper had a scratchy drawing of a person standing in a tunnel. Another read, in shaky handwriting, "You belong here now." My blood turned cold. I backed away, mind racing with questions. Who left these notes? Were they messing with me, or was it genuine? A scraping noise made me freeze. It came from within the tunnel beyond the room. Setting the camera to record in front of me, I quietly stepped out, shining my light along the curved walls. The scrape repeated, a soft clank of something metal moving. It sounded close. I swallowed hard, summoning courage to investigate. My heart pounded as I whispered an update into the camera, describing the noise. As I continued, the graffiti messages grew more intense. More "stay" warnings appeared, sometimes repeated in swirling letters that looked frantic. Splotches of red paint dripped like fresh blood. I tried to keep calm, but every hair on my neck stood on end. If this was a prank, it was an awfully detailed one. Then I heard a hiss, faint and distant, like an angry whisper. My light caught movement, just a flicker of something sliding behind a column or the tunnel wall. I rushed ahead, shining the beam everywhere, but seeing only swirling dust. My heart pounded so loud, I worried it might drown out any other sounds. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but a stronger thirst for proof kept me going. I wanted to capture a clear shot on camera. Then I'd get out, never to return. I forced myself to speak for the documentary's sake, explaining my intent. My voice trembled, but I tried to remain professional. Somewhere in the darkness, a soft laugh echoed, weak and raspy. It seemed to bounce off the walls, making it hard to pinpoint its source. "Who's there?" I called, voice shaky. No answer came, only the tunnel's gloom. Another hiss, then silence. I realized, with rising fear, that whatever was down here might be trying to draw me deeper. The messages urging me to stay suddenly felt more sinister. A louder clang startled me, sounding like metal on metal. I panicked and broke into a run, heading back the way I'd come. My flashlight beam shook wildly with each step, and the camera footage probably became a blur. As I ran, I heard distant footsteps, or perhaps echoes of my own, making me feel like something was chasing me. Rounding the corner to the maintenance room area, I saw that the candle was out. The corridor was pitch black. I sprinted past it, ignoring everything except the urge to escape. Moments later, I tripped over a broken rail. I fell hard, dropping my flashlight, which spun across the floor. I scrambled to retrieve it, heart hammering. From behind me, a soft, scraping sound grew closer. Fighting panic, I grabbed the flashlight and forced my legs into motion again. At last, I spotted the chain gate marking the end of the tunnel. Breaking into a desperate run, I vaulted over the chain and raced across the station platform. My breath burned in my lungs. The "Keep Out" graffiti glared at me like an accusation. I no longer cared about finishing the documentary, I just had to get out. I bolted up the stairs toward the exit. My chest felt tight, and each step echoed in the silent station. By the time I reached the top, my legs ached, but I saw the faint glow of moonlight through the broken entrance gate. Relief washed over me. I spilled out onto the sidewalk, panting. The city's night air felt like a gift. Once I caught my breath, I looked back at the open gate. A dark shape seemed to hover just behind it, but when I blinked, it was gone. Trembling, I slammed the gate shut and piled nearby debris against it, as if that would keep whatever was down there from following me. Then I rushed home. Days later, I reviewed my camera footage. Most of it was grainy. The audio caught me whispering and then shouting. Shadows danced along the tunnel walls, but no clear figure appeared. Still, the frantic graffiti and that flickering candle were there on film. Each time I replayed the hiss or the distant laugh, chills ran through my body. Something wanted me down there, maybe to toy with me, or maybe for something worse. The warnings, "keep out" and "stay," left me wondering if the tunnels themselves were alive with a force that fed on fear. Even now, I can't say exactly what lurks in those subway depths. Some people suspect hungry squatters. Others claim supernatural beings. All I know is that I will never go back. The documentary remains unfinished, but no amount of curiosity will make me return. My single attempt was enough to learn that sometimes we should respect the words we find scrawled on walls. Keep out. Because once it wants you there, it might never let you leave. I had always imagined working at a lighthouse would be peaceful. A simple job of keeping the light on and making sure ships didn't crash into the rocky shore. That was before I arrived at the old lighthouse perched on a craggy cliff, miles away from the nearest town. When the agency hired me for the night shift, I never expected to face such eerie nights. The first time I saw the lighthouse, I felt a sense of awe. It stood tall against the sea, its weathered walls beaten by years of salty winds. The light at the top rotated slowly, shining out over the dark waves. At dusk, the sky melted into a deep orange, and the peaceful hush of the ocean waves made me think the job would be easy. I thought I would read a few books, keep an eye on the light, and enjoy the solitude. But from my very first shift, everything felt different. On my first night, fog rolled in thick and heavy. The foghorn boomed across the water, a low blast that rattled through the walls. Alone in the control room, I flicked the lighthouse light on, making sure the beam swept across the sea. Then I settled into a small chair, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. A few hours later, I thought I heard something like voices. At first, I shrugged it off as the sigh of the wind, but the sounds seemed to form words, hushed and overlapping, as though more than one person whispered in the dark. Each time the foghorn blasted, the voices rose and fell. It was so faint, I questioned my own hearing. Curious and a bit uneasy, I climbed down to the supply room at the base of the tower to check if perhaps the pipes or the old generator made strange noises. Everything seemed normal. The worn-out generator hummed softly as it always did. No voices, no people. Just the silent walls and the echo of wind outside. I returned to my post, telling myself it was just the eerie quiet making me imagine things. The night passed slowly. Occasionally, a deep moan of the foghorn sent a tremor through the building, and each time I swore I heard Echo's soft, drifting voices that vanished as quickly as they came. When dawn broke, I felt relieved. I stepped outside and watched the rising sun burn away the fog. The sound of gulls replaced any lingering whispers. It was peaceful again. Perhaps I had dreamt the voices in my half-asleep state. On the second night, a storm moved in. Rain pounded the glass windows, lightning streaked overhead, and thunder shook the old walls. The foghorn, set to automatic in bad weather, blasted at regular intervals. Each blast vibrated through my bones. That's when I heard the voices again. This time, they sounded clearer murmurs mixed with laughter, as though people were chatting beyond the walls. I grabbed my lantern, determined to investigate. Heading down the spiral staircase, I noticed something that made my skin prick. A handprint on the wall, damp and faint. The glow from my lantern highlighted the outline of a palm and 5 fingers, as though someone had pressed a wet hand against the stone. Drips of water trailed below it, or maybe it was just the dampness from the storm. Still, I had not seen that handprint earlier in the evening. My mind raced. Was someone else here? Could it be a passing traveler who took shelter from the storm? But the door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. Another blast of the foghorn startled me, and I thought I heard a faint giggle echo off the spiral walls. I continued down, my lantern swinging with each step. Then I saw another handprint a few steps lower, more defined. It was placed at shoulder height, as if the person pressed their hand there for balance. But how was it so dry-looking when everything else in the staircase was damp from the storm? My heart jumped. These prints seemed higher and drier each time, as if someone was going up the staircase leaving a trail. I picked up my pace, following the trail of handprints. With each curve of the steps, I found new prints, sometimes on the left wall, sometimes on the right. They led to the control room near the top, but as I finally reached that level, the prints vanished. No sign of them on the final steps leading to the lantern gallery. I burst into the control room, my pulse racing, but I found it empty. The large windows showed sheets of rain lashing the lighthouse exterior. The beam of light rotated calmly, sweeping across the black sea. I shivered, convinced someone had come up behind me and disappeared. A rumble of thunder shook the air, and I jumped at my own reflection in the glass. Then the voices returned, clearer this time, drifting around me with the foghorn blasts. They sounded like they were coming from outside, but the wind and rain made it hard to tell. I scribbled a quick note in the log, something about possible intruder and weird voices. Part of me felt silly writing it down. Still, I had to record everything. That night I barely slept. The storm passed by morning, but I couldn't shake the memory of those voices and the mysterious handprints. The next few nights calmer weather returned, yet the strange sounds persisted. Sometimes, when I carried out my evening checks, I caught a glimpse of a faint shape in the windows, as though someone stood behind me. Each time I turned, nothing was there, only my tired reflection. I began to dread the foghorn's blast. With each resonating note, I looked around nervously. It felt like the voices rode in on that deep sound, calling through the walls. "Who's there?" I sometimes whispered, never receiving an answer. One evening, I decided I couldn't live with the mystery anymore. I grabbed a stronger flashlight and meticulously examined every corridor, every maintenance room, even the cramped storage closet stuffed with old oil cans. The building was empty, not a soul in sight. Still, as midnight approached, the voices returned soft, urging me to come closer, to pay attention. I followed them once more down the spiral staircase, searching for fresh prints. But the walls were bare, not a single new handprint. It was like whoever or whatever had left them before was now toying with me. Just when I started thinking about quitting, something changed. During a calm night with gentle waves below and the light shining steadily, I heard the ghostly voices again, but this time they sounded almost sad. It was as though they were calling out, not to scare me, but to be heard. I tried to focus on the words, but they were too jumbled. The best I could make out was a long sigh, like a lament carried on the wind. The next morning, I spoke to an older fisherman in the nearby town, someone who'd lived by the sea his entire life. He wasn't surprised when I mentioned odd occurrences at the lighthouse. He said many ships had wrecked along that shore before the beacon was automated, and perhaps the souls lost at sea felt connected to the light that was meant to save them. Whether that explained the handprints or the voices, I can't say for sure, but I felt a twinge of acceptance. Maybe those restless spirits had found a way to reach out on foggy nights, drawn by the heavy sound of the foghorn. Perhaps they left their prints in whispers as a reminder of the lives once lost to the ocean. From then on, I approached my night shifts with a strange mix of calm and caution. The voices never fully stopped, but they no longer filled me with terror. Once in a while, I would wake to a faint whisper swirling around the tower, or notice a single new handprint on the wall. I never touched them, and they always vanished by morning's light. I remain watchful, keeping the beam lit to guide ships safely. In the darkness, when the foghorn booms and I sense shadows on the stairs, I remind myself that I'm not really alone. The old lighthouse holds secrets in its walls, haunted by echoes of the past, and with each blast of the horn, the voices return softly at first, then louder, as though they're telling a story older than the lighthouse itself. I stand my post, hoping my presence might bring them a small measure of peace, even as their handprints slowly appear, step by step, each night they choose to climb. I'd been staying late at the office for weeks, preparing for a major project deadline. One evening, I left my desk when the clock struck 10, rubbing my tired eyes as I entered the parking garage. The garage lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the concrete pillars. I was the only person left on my floor, or so I thought. I remembered hearing rumors from coworkers about footsteps echoing in the garage after hours. Some claimed they had heard soft tapping sounds following them to their cars. Others even insisted they felt someone watching them from behind the pillars. I never believed those stories, figured they were just spooky tales people told to pass time in a dull office. But that night something felt different. My car was parked in one of the far corners. The moment I stepped out of the elevator and onto the concrete floor, I noticed how quiet everything was. Usually you could hear distant traffic or the hum of other cars pulling in. This time it was silent except for the buzzing lights overhead. My footsteps echoed back to me, sounding louder than normal. Each step seemed to bounce off the walls, coming back in a slight delay, like an offbeat drum. Halfway to my car, I froze. There it was, a faint sound of steps other than my own, tapping on the concrete behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but saw nobody. The only things nearby were rows of parked cars and tall, gray pillars. The air felt oddly heavy, like something lingered in the shadows. I picked up my pace, telling myself that exhaustion was causing me to hear things. Then, just as I reached my car and pressed the unlock button, I heard it again. Soft, deliberate footsteps. They seemed to keep time with my own movements, but stopped the instant I stopped. A prickle of fear ran across my skin. Hurriedly, I got into my driver's seat and locked the doors. Just drive away, I told myself, relief flooding me now that I was in my vehicle. But when I turned the key in the ignition, the engine gave a weak sputter and then died. My mouth went dry. The car had never given me trouble before. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal gently. Still no luck. My headlights wouldn't even flicker. Outside, everything was still. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the hood release and grabbed the small flashlight from my glove compartment. I'd checked the engine, though I wasn't exactly a mechanic. Stepping out into the dimly lit garage, I kept an eye on the pillars. Images of someone or something hiding behind them flashed through my mind. I cleared my throat, as if somehow that could scare off an unseen presence. The only response was silence. With shaky hands, I lifted the hood and shone the flashlight inside. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe a loose cable or an obvious leak. My limited knowledge offered no solution. "Looks fine to me," I muttered under my breath. But as I leaned in to peer closer, I heard those footsteps again, this time moving around me in a half circle, slow and careful. A wave of cold swept from my head to my toes. I stood up straight, directed my flashlight toward the closest pillar, and called out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice echoed in the empty space. No answer came, only the distant hum of the garage lights. My flashlight beam revealed nothing, just chipped concrete and old oil stains. Yet my instincts told me I wasn't alone. Then I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. It vanished as soon as I turned my head. Fear made my pulse race. Could it be a security guard messing with me? But a guard would normally announce themselves. Could it be a harmless coworker who stayed even later than me? None of the possibilities explained why they would creep around like that. Desperate to leave, I tried my phone. The screen lit up, showing no signal. That made no sense, since I usually had at least some reception in the garage. I tried calling anyway, but it wouldn't connect. The phone beeped twice, then died despite having battery power left. I stared at the blank screen, unsettled. I decided to head for the stairwell leading back up to the office. Maybe I could find help or call a taxi from the higher floors. Locking my car again, I took the flashlight and started walking briskly. That's when the footsteps grew louder, as if mirroring my pace. My heart hammered in my chest. I flashed the light wildly around. A glimpse of a faint shadow slid behind a pillar on my right. I shouted, "Show yourself!" But no one replied. The tension in the air felt suffocating. A clang suddenly broke the silence, like a piece of metal striking pavement. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls. Then everything went still again. I forced my feet to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. If there was a threat, it was better to confront it than remain endlessly stuck in fear. But as I approached the pillar where I'd seen the shadow, I found nothing, just a damp oil patch. I aimed my light further, scanning the next row of pillars. Still empty. My own breath sounds too loud in the hush. The sense of being watched intensified, raising goosebumps on my arms. Finally, I spotted the door to the stairwell, just a few yards ahead. Relief surged through me, and I broke into a half-run. The footsteps behind me sped up too, their echo bouncing in the air. It felt as though an invisible figure trailed just behind me, waiting for me to slow down. I reached the door and yanked it open. Slipping inside, I slammed it shut, pressing my back against the cool metal. My heart thudded. Outside, something tapped lightly against the door as if testing it. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Climbing the steps two at a time, I reached the office level and dashed to the lobby where the security guard was dozing. The guard woke with a start as I approached, out of breath, and I quickly explained my situation. Together, we went back down, but this time the footsteps were gone, and the car engine miraculously started on the first turn of the key. I drove away with shaking hands, glancing in the rearview mirror at the concrete pillars fading behind me. From that night on, I never stayed late at the office without good company. Some mysteries are better left alone in the echoing darkness of a deserted parking garage, where unseen footsteps seem all too real and too close.